tree of life reappears in that environment. And paradise that was lost will be restored. In between those two trees is God's Christmas tree, the cross of Christ. The first tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, took away man's spiritual and physical life. The second tree, the tree of life, restored mankind's quality of spiritual and physical life. And the third tree is the tree that opened the door for the possibility for us to have everlasting life. Now, this week we're going to look at tree number 1. In Genesis 2 and 3, we'll look at both these trees, but in particular, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Next week, we'll consider the tree of life as it reappears in Genesis 22. Then Christmas Eve, we will consider the cross of Christ, God's Christmas tree. And we'll ask the question, what does the Christmas tree as we know it have to do with any of this at all? Now, the message of this day and the title of this message is Paradise Lost. It is not an original title. If you know literature, you know I stole the title. I stole it from a very old poem written by John Milton in 1667, known as Paradise Lost, a quite voluminous poem. It's an epic narrative poem, and in its original form was between 400 and 500 pages of literature, a sizable book. And in that sizable book were a little more than 10,000 lines of verse that in poetic fashion tell the story of the fall of man and mankind's expulsion from the Garden of Eden. Here's the first line of that poem that sets it up. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe. Couldn't be more accurate. He sums up in the very first line all of our problems and where they began. Now, what I'd like to do in looking at Genesis 2 and 3, I have a hunch that you already know this story and you're pretty familiar with it. So I'm not going to go through all of these verses in these two chapters, obviously, for the sake of time, but I'll select certain ones to tell the story. But we're going to look at 4 words that describe 4 different stages of humanity and 4 stages of our mess, of our dilemma. And all of these are because the choice that was made regarding this one tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Let me give you the 4 words in advance, and then we'll go through one by one. Perfection, plunge, penalty, prediction. Perfection, plunge, penalty, and prediction. The first word is perfection because that describes the world of the beginning. I'm going to take you to Genesis 2, but down to verse 7 where we will begin. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. The Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden. By the way, Eden is a word that means delight. And there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground the Lord God made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This is the history of the beginning of humanity. And I call it history. It is not a myth. It is not an allegory. It is history. Because Jesus Christ himself referred to the creation account and Adam and Eve as being literal. So if you have a problem with the creation account, you have a problem with Christ himself.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.